I think that one of the keys to the success, or at least the acceptance of the Western Rite, is that we know our history. And I think many people think of Orthodoxy as the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church that started with Christ and the Apostles and existed in an Eastern form since then. Without having much knowledge or at least recognition of what was going on in the West, unfortunately the world was divided into East and West for many centuries. Those divisions, those geographic and imperial divisions, allowed for the different cultural expressions to be developed. Denying some of those cultural developments is a mistake, and we need to try to correct that by at least understanding our history. When the Russians were converted to Orthodoxy in 988, they immediately put their Russian stamp on the way worship happened. The Bulgarians did the same thing. I was recently asked to review a new CD by a Bulgarian choir of Bulgarian church music from the 19th century, 20th century. Beautiful music, distinctly Bulgarian, distinctly Orthodox. The same is true of the West. The only problem is that the West divided itself off, beginning a little after 1054 is the date we usually use, although in the far reaches of the western part of the empire, they didn't know about that excommunication, and certainly the people in the north of England thought they were Orthodox for at least another couple hundred years. But even after that, the cultural expression of Christianity was not necessarily unorthodox. And so those are the things that the Western Rite today needs to recover. What we can use from the from the 900 years between 1054 and 1958, when we were accepted as a Western Rite into the Antiochian Archdiocese, but also to recover what we can make use of from the first 1,000 years. So just a little bit of, we're going to flip back and forth between all the collections of things you have. In the main book, the material you have, I think it was section 3, orange, yellow. Okay.
Sorry to ask
yes.
something about the history.
Yes.
Before you.
That's right.
So before the Western Rite was accepted into the Antiochian Archdiocese,
Yes.
I'm sure you said this already.
Yeah.
Were you part of the Catholic Church, or was it a separate entity?
There was only during that period, there was Eastern Orthodoxy, which had many different forms depending on the country of origin. And there was Western Christianity, which was Roman Catholic from 1054 or whatever date you want to choose until the Protestant Reformation. And that's one of the things we should talk about. And that's when that all fell apart. And so there were many, many more expressions or cultural as well as theological changes in Christianity in the West. So as Western Rite Orthodox, we have been given the permission, the privilege, first of all, of being truly Orthodox, part of the family, sharing the faith of the apostles, but the privilege of expressing that in ways which were historically Western, not Eastern. We don't use Byzantine chant. We use what is called Gregorian chant. We sang a little bit of that this morning, and we'll do a little bit more now. But that's just a cultural difference that developed in different parts of the world. There's nothing unorthodox about either one of them. There's nothing exclusively Orthodox about either one. So we have the privilege of using something, bringing something back in that for 1,000 years was part of the church. Yes.
So specifically for the Western Rite,
Yes.
Orthodox before 1958,
Yes,
whose domain were you under?
there was no.
There was
None.
So
There
there
actually
were churches in existence and they just weren't under
no.
anywhere?
There were attempts at bringing the Western expression of the faith back into Orthodoxy, and those began in the 19th century. Especially the Moscow Patriarchate was approached by Roman Catholics, old Catholics. There were break-off churches that were trying to get closer to the original faith. So they approached the Moscow Patriarch, who began to study the liturgical books. So, and those studies proved that, yes, this is basically Orthodox. You need to make a little change here, a little tweak there. This is Orthodox. We can accept this. These studies went on until the Revolution. And the Moscow Patriarch had approved the acceptance of Western Rite parishes. This did not materialize at that time because of the Revolution, and that's how everything got confused in this country, in Orthodoxy in general, because the Russians had been the overseers, the protectors of Orthodoxy in this country. So that kind of went by the wayside, but it still was remembered, and we still have, as part of our documents, the Western Rite documents, the approval of the Moscow Patriarchate of the Catholic liturgy. Then Anglicans, Episcopalians in this country began approaching church hierarchs to see, okay, so they have it's a liturgy that was based on the Gregorian Catholic liturgy, that was old by the time our parish is named for St. Gregory the Great, who was the dialogist, who's honored in all Orthodoxy as one of the liturgists. He had the Liturgy of the Pre-Sanctified is attributed to St. Gregory. He was the Pope of Rome, in charge of all the West, which was everywhere from Italy all the way up to Scotland, Ireland, and everything in between. So a huge part of the world was under the Western Patriarch. The liturgy that is given his name, just by honor, was already old in his day. So the only things that are different about that liturgy from his time and earlier than the way we use it today are several things. It's in English. It was in Latin then and for 1,000 years. It is the things that have been added. Pope Sergius, who was a Syrian pope in 700 and something, added one chant, the Agnus Dei in Latin, Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. There was a controversy at the time, and West and East didn't agree. The controversy was, can Christ be artistically portrayed as a lamb? And the West said, yes, it's right there in Scripture. St. John says, behold, the Lamb of God. East said, no, Christ could only be portrayed as a man, the incarnate God. So that little controversy never got totally ironed over, but the result for the West was that a new chant was added to the liturgy. That was in the 700s. The next change that happened, I think there was one little tweak by the Moscow Patriarchate, and then the next thing was Patriarch Ignatius of blessed memory had the I believe and I confess prayer added to our liturgy, so that the whole family is saying at least one prayer that is the same. So it's a very ancient liturgy, and it's been approved by 2 patriarchates as perfectly Orthodox. So that's the liturgy we use. I forget what the question was.
I didn't know anything about the Western Rite history. I don't know anything about the liturgy that you guys do.
Okay.
So thank you.
Okay. Well, I hope that answers that question.
What about
Late
in
18.
Europe and the Gallican Church?
Yeah, there were many, probably maybe more cultural differences or expressions in the West liturgically in the first 1,000 years than there were in the East. I'm really not sure about the East. I don't know whether, because countries are that exist now didn't then, and I don't know how many different ethnic groups had their own, kind of teaching.
Was under the impression that they were Western.
Yes, there was a Gallican liturgy, there was a Sarum liturgy in England, a number of different, Milan in Italy had its own separate liturgy, and many of those sort of became amalgamated by St. Gregory and into the Gregorian liturgy. So now currently in the Western Rite, in our Antiochian Archdiocese, we are allowed two different liturgies, two different orders of service for the Sunday morning services, the Mass as we call it. The one is the Gregorian, which I just described to you. The other is that English version, which came down through the Anglican Church, but which is based on the Gregorian. They're very similar, they're just slightly different wordings here and there, a couple of prayers that are different, but they're basically the same liturgy. So those are our two choices. St. Gregory and St. Tikhon, the other one is named for St. Tikhon. I mentioned this morning that we feel very blessed to have been blessed by two of the North American saints. I'll say this for those who weren't there. St. Tikhon, when he was in this country, visited St. Mark's Church in Denver, Colorado, which is now Western Rite Orthodox. He was friends of the Episcopal bishop, who was not a crazy person at the time. They are all now. But he befriended him, and they had a good friendship, and he came to a service, and so they have almost like secondary relics, the candlesticks, I think, that were present at that service, that they've kept as something very precious because of being in the room with St. Tikhon. And so St. Tikhon is considered the patron of our Western Rite vicariate. St. John Maximovich is the other one. When he was in Paris, learned about Western saints from Gaul and Italy, and in this country encouraged the writings of the lives of those saints in English, so that Eastern Orthodox people could know their heritage, their broader heritage from the first 1,000 years. Wonderful collection of saints. St. Patrick, how could we think that St. Patrick, who converted Ireland, how could we think that he is an Orthodox? St. Ambrose of Milan, who was a wonderful bishop. He's considered the father of Western hymnody. He was Bishop of Milan during the Arian controversy, and there was a time, there were many times I'm sure, but this is a famous one that's told about, when his people had there was like warfare in the streets between the Arians and the Orthodox Christians. And so the people gathered in the Cathedral of Milan purposely to save the cathedral from being taken over by the Arians, which happened because they had the support of the emperor. But so the people gathered, and St. Ambrose took that opportunity to teach them some hymns and some antiphonal psalm singing. So that before that time, which is 397, it's in your timeline. Before that, I guess psalms were sung by the cantor and the congregation, or by everybody together, or just the cantors. But St. Ambrose taught them an Eastern style of singing, chanting, which was one side sing one verse, the other side sing the other verse, antiphonal psalm singing. We still use that method. And that's what they did to survive the bombardment of the Arians who were trying to attack the church. So, yes. Question.
Maybe I'm getting you off track.
No, there is no track. So.
But up until, using 1054, up until
Right.
1053, everybody was Orthodox,
Right.
and all of a sudden there's this great schism. All the Western churches under the Patriarch of Rome, so to speak,
Right.
became Catholic in the Reformation. But those Orthodox parishes or churches that wanted to remain Orthodox stayed Orthodox in some form. and then eventually sought, if you will, accreditation with Moscow, for example. And now we have something called the Western Rite of churches in America, which are about 24 or so,
Right.
that are now accredited by the Antiochian Patriarch in wherever.
Right.
And there is a Western Rite under Antioch. Are there Western Rite churches with the other patriarchs, like in Moscow,
Yes.
in Greece, etc.?
I don't know about many other countries. I do know that New Zealand, our Metropolitan Paul of Australia and New Zealand has allowed the Western Rite, or I mean, he had to, but there are Western Rite parishes. My husband is friends with some of the priests in New Zealand who come to this country occasionally. There was an attempt in England, but there was probably a lot of objection by the Anglicans because our liturgy is too close to theirs. Our faith is not. But there is also the Russian church outside Russia has Western Rite parishes in this
Okay.
country. So I'm not sure how much further that's gone. But your comment about parishes wanting to stay Orthodox from 1054 to 1954, I don't think there was any thought of that. There was no knowledge that we're not Orthodox anymore. It was a very slow process. The dividing between the two sides of the world was a very slow, gradual thing, and the average guy in the average parish was not really aware of it. I think the English probably were more aware than anybody else, or maybe it's just that we know more about them because the historical records are in English. But the resistance to the takeover, so to speak, or the fall away from orthodoxy was greater there. But it still took 900 years to bring that back to fruition. Okay, so one of the biggest tasks for the Western Rite, and Father John Connolly is going to sleep in the back, but if he would like to interrupt and contribute something, he is from the parish, St. Mark's in Denver, where St. Tikhon was present.
I have advanced senile dementia, so.
Oh. Well, you may have something to add.
I'm not sure where I am.
Well, you just sleep on, Father. All right, well, for those of you who are in Eastern parishes and don't know much about the Western Rite, and these are things that I did not get to in the talk this morning. So let me just talk a little bit about what we actually do in church in our Western Rite parishes. Remember that, as I said, we're very small. We're just the tiniest little blip on the map of Orthodoxy. But we feel that we have a mighty heritage to bring into Orthodoxy. But we're not, all of our parishes are small enough, most of our parishes are small enough. Our choirs are feeble enough that we're not able to show the magnificent liturgies, the magnificent musical offerings of the greatest pinnacles of the West. We would like to be able to do that, and we'd like to get to that point. Right now, we struggle with presenting what we can with what we have. Yes?
Quick question.
Yes.
this time. Are you allowed to use instruments?
We are. If you study the issue, there was never a council of the church that forbade instruments.
Okay.
There was great objection to the use of instruments in the East in the early days. And I have a theory about that. The circus, where Christians were thrown to the animals to be killed, the organ, particularly the hydraulis, was used in all the pagan ceremonies, which were very public. Instruments were used, and I think the early Christian fathers in the East felt that they wanted to distance themselves, and so they made most of the scriptural references to instruments were taken as symbolic rather than as actual, that we can use symbols. And but in the West, there was much less of that, fewer coliseums, fewer, chances of Christians being thrown to the animals. And as I said earlier this morning, the organ itself as an instrument was introduced into the West by Constantinople because it was used there and in Hagia Sophia for imperial ceremonies. The organ was played as the emperor entered the church and whenever he met dignitaries from around the world. So, but in the West, it took a different form. It became the instrument of the church. So for 800 years maybe, the organ became the primary instrument of the church. So just as an aside, my husband, who's an Orthodox priest, his secular profession, which he did before we became Orthodox, he builds organs, pipe organs, and so he owns a company that does that work. They are seeing now, though, that Protestant churches and Catholic churches are turning to pop music, bands, guitars. Many Hispanic immigrants have changed the tenor of worship in those churches too. So the favor is of guitars and that sort of thing. So a lot of organs are being neglected and not used. But for 1,000 years, 800 maybe, the organ was the primary instrument for use in the church. But other instruments were allowed too. St. Mark's in Venice in the Renaissance in the 16th, 17th century was famous around the world for the brass music that preceded and accompanied large processions, religious processions. There was never an objection in the West to using instruments in church, but always the instruments had to be not dominate the liturgy, they were an accompaniment. Music is always considered the handmaid of the liturgy. So the music is always supposed to be something that enhances or helps in the reverent worship of the people. Let's just look at in the book, the original notebook, you should have just an example of a Gregorian chant, Sanctus we call it, the Latin name, Holy, Holy, Holy. Those of you who were there this morning sang Gregorian chant so beautifully that this should be easy. Just a reminder that Gregorian chant is very flowing, very easygoing, very legato. None of this, no marching, nothing, just da 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 da. Also, speech accents, if there are any accents at all. A lot of melismas, several notes to one syllable of the words. So can we just sing through this? Does everybody have a copy you can see? Is this part of the anaphora? Is that what it's called in the Eastern liturgy? Okay. But we say this. Holy, 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 Lord second set of words. Hosanna in highest. Okay, just to stop there. I told you that the two liturgies, the Gregorian and Tikhon, there are slight changes here and there of wording. This is one of them. The Tikhon liturgy sings, "Glory be to thee, O Lord Most High," and we sing, "Hosanna in the highest." a little confusing thing, but that's the way it is. Going on, this is what we call the Benedictus. This is what was added by Pope Sergius in the 700s. Now, I'm going to speak from personal experience, and those of you who are in other Western Rite parishes may have a different situation in your parishes. At St. Gregory's, we divide who sings what into the unchanging parts of the service sung by the congregation, and this is what we use, Gregorian chant. There are a number of things like that that are sung by the congregation. The choir sings the changing parts of the service, also mostly to Gregorian chant. Anybody do anything differently in your parishes? Same. Okay. Also, I should mention, we've had a lot of discussion so far at the SMI this year about Byzantine notation, Western notation, and a little bit of scuffling back and forth between how that works. We do have a similar thing in the Western Rite. There is Gregorian notation. I don't have it, I just have a copy, which I'll put up here later, of an early manuscript which shows the beginnings of notation. Words down below, squiggle, 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 squiggle. Just any kind of little, choir members' indication of, okay, do the notes go up? Do they go down? Do they last a long time? Are they short? The sort of things that you would write in your music in your choir today. Eventually, those became more uniform, so that a choir director would say, wait a minute, let's do this the same way, all of us. And it improved and it proved through the centuries, and eventually a type of Gregorian notation developed on 4-line staff that is easily read today. So many argue, including Father John, who's still asleep back there, that Gregorian notation is the only way to go because it's much more accurate, and he's right, it is much more accurate. But some of us have decided that it's also much more user-friendly for the average person to put things into Western. Yes.
My experience is that people learn the square note notation much more readily than modern notation.
My experience is that people don't learn the notation. It doesn't matter what it is, they don't learn the notation. They learn by the ear. But at St. Gregory's, we do both. We use Gregorian notation for the many of the psalms, the canticles, that sort of thing. But for more melismatic music, like this, which has many more phrases that have like 4 and 5 notes to a syllable, we use modern notation. Yes.
Clarification, at St. Peter,
Yes.
we encourage the congregation to sing along with the choir of croppers. They're printed in the bulletin, and especially when we do a Requiem Mass.
Oh, yes.
We do a Requiem setting, and the congregation sings all the parts with us.
Yes, I've heard that
It's
some
encouraged in
parishes
our
do that.
congregation.
Yeah. So there are different ways of doing it. Do you have anything that you set aside just for the choir?
Just an anthem, if we do an anthem.
Okay. And when do you do those?
That would be at the offertory,
Ah, okay.
right after the offertory sing.
Okay. So there are several different possibilities.
So Corinne, I wanted
Yes,
to
okay.
ask you something. So online these days, you see blogs, why Catholics can't sing, there's a book by
Yes,
that,
I've
that's
read it.
excellent.
Yeah.
There, why evangelicals can't sing, that's a different set of reasons. And now, most recently, why Orthodox can't sing. That's a different set too. There are similarities.
Mm-hmm.
My question, I guess, is singing mustn't be lost. Certainly not in the Orthodox Church, but we are it's being said that your music's abysmal. And this has been said by people, I won't name them here, but that they work at St. Econ Seminary and people like that. So, when we put out two different kinds of notation, be it Byzantine and normal Western, or be it this,
Gregorian or Western, yeah.
Are we not putting one more roadblock in front of the future of music in the Orthodox Church?
There are going to be two different opinions in this room about that. So we will find out, won't we?
We are finding out.
Yeah, but I think that regardless of the notation style, the issue is that Americans don't sing. Once the electronic age brought us iPads and CDs, and we don't sing anymore. We listen to music, but we don't make music. Families don't sing, on Sunday night around the dinner table. Kids don't go to camp, maybe Antiochian camp, but they don't go to Girl Scout camp and sing around the campfire like they did when I was a kid 100 years ago. So I think the problem in America is that we just don't sing, and we're not teaching music in the public schools. Maybe we shouldn't leave it to the public schools, but we at least for many years had that as a base from which to work. That kids learn to read music in music class in second grade. They learn to play the tonette or the recorder. Yeah, and it was called a tonette 100 years ago. So I think we're missing a lot of that, but the church can do much to help that. One of my sopranos is 8 years old. In my former life, in a larger parish, I had I wouldn't even say children's choir, but my trebles were well trained, 2 rehearsals a week, very hard work, and could sing 5-part motets in Latin. But and so that's only because I taught them to do that, and because they were expected to do it, and because they loved it. I think kids would love it again if that was an expectation.
The church used to be the leader of teaching singing.
Yes.
Gregorian chant. Right? They were leading the world, and we need to lead the world.
Yes.
Don't we?
Okay. Call to action.
Your music. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Well, this is a call to action, right? So encourage the children in your church. Bring them into choir rehearsals, even if you don't allow them to sing for a while. Bring them in so that they start to notice what's on the page and to hear and to make their voices do what they're hearing. So we do have a responsibility. Okay, let's sing. Let's don't talk anymore. We sang Receive Me Today this morning. Can we do that again? And then some more things? What voice parts do we have? Sopranos? Ooh, that's slim. Okay, altos. That's more. Okay, tenors. And basses. Some people didn't raise their hands at all. All right, this piece is just 3-part, so all the men are baritones, and sopranos need to get together. So where were you again? The 2 of you and 1 of you. Do you want to come over and join them? How many of you sang this morning? Yeah, I'm sorry to have to ask again. Okay, enough. I tried to put music in the book that is on texts that we share with East and West. This is one. The prayer that was added to our liturgy, the I Believe and I Confess, has this in it. Notice that the parts fall in and out. So just watch where you fall in. Sopranos, are we ready? Stop you a little bit faster, please. I'm having trouble getting the peanut butter sound out. The next section Sopranos had a little trouble with some of the notes this morning, so just it's going to be your next part. So F, baritones, right on, for I will not. For I will not speak of thy mysteries to thine enemies, neither will I give thee a kiss as did Judah. Okay, let's go back and do that section again. I didn't intend to have choir rehearsal, but I think we need to. Sopranos. Starting on speak. Speak of thy mysteries to thine enemies, neither will I give thee a kiss as did Judah. Okay, good, let's put it together now. Baritone. For I will not speak of thy mysteries to thine enemies, neither will I give thee a kiss as did Judah. But like a thief will I confess thee. Remember me, O Lord, in thy kingdom. Remember me, O Lord, in thy kingdom. Good. Okay, that's a solution to a small choir problem. As I said, we have 5 chanters or singers in our choir. One is the 8-year-old soprano who's making great progress. One is the soprano who thinks she's an opera singer and can't read music and has a big vibrato that I have to sit on all the time. The other is a very nice soprano who reads music well, but who has asthma and no lungs. I'm the alto, and I have a baritone who's getting older, and some of the high notes. But I write the music for those particular voices because that's what they can sing well. And as Paul said numerous times this morning, pick the music your choir can sing well, and it will be inspiring. So there's many more where that came from. Now, one of the packets for this afternoon that was supposed to be in the morning packet, If You Love Me by Thomas Tallis. I put this in as an example of what happened at the Reformation in the West. I don't know what copies were provided. They were, like I said, they were supposed to be in the morning. They're not in either packet? Oh, shoot. Well, that's a perfectly wonderful piece that all of us can do. If You Love Me by Thomas Tallis. It's on a text from St. John's Gospel. Okay, sorry. Well, I'll try to make copies and have them available for the afternoon, the later sessions, the breakout sessions, so that you can at least have a copy. Okay, now just a couple of things for an explanation for Eastern Rite people. The Western Rite differs. We have the same faith. Our liturgy is similar, only not the same. The order of things is basically the same for a service of communion, but there are different elements in it. We have, and our basic services are the same. We have Vespers, we have Matins for Sunday morning, and then the liturgy. For Matins and Vespers, most of what we sing are psalms. In the Western Rite, the psalms are divided. Once again, there are two different versions we can use, either monastic offices for Vespers and Matins or lauds, and those are services that were designed for monasteries, and they have a set number of psalms and canticles and hymns that go with each day. For the English version, which our parish uses, the psalms are divided for a month, and so we go through the entire Psalter in a month's time. It's wonderful to be able to hear and sing those psalms over and over again, but when you get to the 10th day at evening prayer, you're going to hear a particular number of psalms, and it's a wonderful cycle. The canticles, Vespers was put together in England at the time of the Reformation from the original monastic Vespers in Compline, and so 2 canticles from each of those services were put together. Magnificat, my soul doth magnify the Lord, St. Mary's song, and the song of Simeon, Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace. So we share, I know that you have them in different places, but we share a lot of texts that are the same. The Holy, 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 which we just sang. Kyrie we use in a different way in the liturgy. Instead of having several different litanies, successions of petitions with Lord have mercy after each one, we sing one long Kyrie, which has been added to it, Christe eleison, and we sing that all straight through, first thing at the beginning of a liturgy. The petitions are going on in heaven and all around us, but not verbally, not orally. Let's see, what else do we have in common? The Agnus Dei, you don't sing, but we do. Although there's a little bit, isn't there somewhere? O Lamb of God? Somewhere, or maybe just, yeah. Okay. Morning canticles we sing, they're all scriptural. One of the things about Orthodoxy in the West is that the West was very suspicious of things that went on in the East. All the heresies came out of the East. And so the Western patriarchs were very careful to avoid newly written poetry, because that was a dangerous thing, because that's how heresy crept in. And so most of the things that are sung in the Western liturgies are scriptural. So all of our little things, the introit and the communion verses, they're all scriptural, with a few exceptions. The hymns we sing, that is another subject. I need to go to that subject. Hymns are, we use that term a little bit differently in the Western Rite. A hymn technically is a song of praise. It can be a hymn to the sun god. It can be a hymn to the goddess of love. It can be, a hymn is just a song of praise. Hymns, Christian hymns, are hymns of praise to our God, the one true God. And so we don't apply, but in the Western Rite, we don't apply that term to all of the chants we sing, all the verses that we sing here and there. It's usually applied to 2 different kinds of songs. One are liturgical hymns, and those are hymns that are required by our missal, our book of worship, that has all the services in it. And those are the specific hymns for the days of the week at Vespers and Matins, hymns for specific seasons of the year. You have, I think, in one of the packets, another Gregorian chant hymn, which actually is a Milanese Ambrosian. It's called O Trinity of Blessed Light. We're skipping all around historically, but this is another hymn. Please ignore the accompaniment. That's for if your singers won't sing unless they have something backing them up. But the melody, just follow the melody, which is what it was intended to be.
It's in the Thursday packet.
It's on the back of this.
Very first page.
Oh, found it. Thank you.
Another hymn, another song, hymn with a lot of melismas, 5 notes to 1 syllable. This is the hymn that is specified for Vespers from, what does it say, from Trinity Sunday on until we get to Advent. And it's also used on feast days of the Trinity, on the feast day of the Trinity. Let me try to sing it. O Trinity of blessed light, O unity of rising light, thou brings about this way, shall thou within our hearts thy ways. So that's a hymn, a specific liturgical hymn. Then we are also given permission to use hymns that arose out of the Protestant Reformation, hymns that were an attempt to return singing to congregations. In some places, in some parishes, these hymns are the only thing that the congregation sings or sings well or is willing to sing or whatever. Usually they're accompanied. For us, my husband, when he was doing his Doctor of Ministry program in the Archdiocese, his project was to create a hymnal for Orthodox use in the Western Rite. And so he went through hundreds of other hymnals, searched out poems, and found and sifted through them and got Bishop Basil and other people to look at the text for approval for Orthodox use. So we have a book of 350 hymns that are just sung as songs by the congregation that can be sung before the service, after the service, sometimes at the offertory or somewhere where there's some liturgical action going on that music can cover. And so these are usually in a style that, well, we sang one this morning, which we use at Vespers, but in that sort of style. I didn't bring another example, but just to let you know, if you go to a Western Rite service and it's the first one you've ever been to, you may be surprised to hear a hymn that sounds like, oh my gosh, am I in a Methodist church? Did I make a wrong turn? Those are congregational hymns that we're allowed to use. Let's see, what else? I think that's it. Are there questions? We have 5 minutes. I'm sorry?
Okay, so my question to you is, it's a beautiful piece to receive. I mean, it's textually, I could use that in an Eastern Rite.
Yes.
How many of those do you have that a person could take and literally do in there without having any problems with that?
Funny you should ask. Okay, these are the pieces that I've written for our little choir. Now, you probably have a 4-voice choir, and so you might need, more challenging music.
Not necessarily.
But these, I just now put these in this collection with a spiral bound. But it's everything from little antiphons, like we do at communion, little antiphons with the verses sung to Gregorian chant, and then the antiphon is in harmony, to pieces like Receive Me.
Whether you have a large choir or not, there's pieces of music could be unison.
Yes.
There's parts that are just beautiful.
Yes.
It doesn't really matter. So, yeah, but that was my question because, I'm always looking for new things, and I was wondering how much of that could I take and just literally without having any problem using it?
I think most of this, because most of it is scriptural.
Are you
The
selling
texts
them?
are scriptural.
Do-
They will be for sale. I mean, I just got these in the mail from Lulu. Well, I can show you this, and then you can order it on Lulu. But yes, the texts are scriptural. I think you should ask your priest to make sure. There's a couple of things. I mean, some of this is of specific Western Rite liturgies. It's called for in the liturgy, but the texts are often, they're scriptural anyway. I think the youth group is going to be singing one that I wrote on a scriptural text that anybody can use. There's one or two that have an east on even, a little nod to the east. So, yeah, and then I hope you all know about choral music in the public domain, the website you can go to get free music. Any composer from the Renaissance particularly, you can look it up by voice part, by season, by text, whatever. So, and this is here for anybody to look at if you want to.
Can you give us the website?
For choral music, it's a long string of things. So just look up choral music in the public domain, and it'll get you there. Yes.
What was the website you gave this morning that you had music?
Oh, for our website is St. Gregory.
ST what?
St. Gregory, Gregory, OC, Orthodox Church.org. Father John Connolly, also St. Mark's has their own publishing company, sorry.
We probably sell more Gregorian chant for English texts
Yes.
than anybody
Yes.
anywhere.
So his books are expensive, by the way, but they're very beautiful. They're very beautiful, and he will offer special deal just for you. I'm sure.